الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Uh, we finished كتاب الحج, the chapter of Al-Hajj and the Udhiyah and the Aqiqah, and the next chapter is Al-Jihad. The next chapter is Al-Jihad, and hopefully inshallah ta'ala we'll finish it today. It's a brief, and as it's the nature of this level, and the book is just very brief, not all of the masail, not all of the things that needs to be covered, but this is one level after another, inshallah. So he says al-jihad, ta'rifuhu. What is the definition of al-jihad? We're talking about fiqh. This is fiqh, so it's related to the laws. So it's the practicality, the actions, the laws. And he will mention also the different types of al-jihad later, inshallah ta'ala. But the definition in the context of al-fiqh is هو بذل الطاقة والوسع في قتال الكفار. Is to بذل الطاقة, is to exert oneself to one's best ability and capacity in fighting the kuffar. So this is what the word jihad, when it's mentioned in the subject of fiqh and the ayat of the Quran, and it's related to basically warfare, the war, how wars are, not anything else. And of course, with the different types of jihad to be observed. So what are the laws that governs the war? According to the Sharia, according to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. As everything else, he talks about the hikmah, or the wisdom behind that this is part of the deen. He says, Al-jihadu dhirwatu sanami al-Islam, the highest level of the deen of Islam, wa afdalu mutatawwi'in bih, the best tatawwu', the best thing to do as an optional act of worship, because of what the outcome or the benefits of it, and for oneself and for others, because this is a sign that a person, his deen is the most important thing, and that the person will be willing to sacrifice even his life and his wealth for the sake of Allah. Because the first wisdom behind it is لِتَكُونَ كَلِمَةُ اللَّهِ الْعُلْيَا وَيَكُونَ الدِّينُ كُلُّهُ لِلَّهِ, for the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be superior, and for the deen, all of it to be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to worship Him alone. And this dunya, this worldly life, there's no goodness in it unless the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is superior on oneself and on others. And even if others, they continue to be in the state of disbelief, which is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the people, they're not going to be all believers. So as a result of that is to also establish the justice of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the second thing, لإسعاد البشرية, to make humanity happier and to get them out of the darknesses to the light. And that's why the next one is to establish justice on the face of earth by making the haqq haqq, بإحقاق الحق, by making the truth apparent and present, and to make the batil or the falsehood batil, and for people to see that it's falsehood, and to prevent injustice and corruption, to spread the deen and to protect the Muslimin, and to push away the evil plots of the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and many other matters of wisdom here. What is the hukm of al-jihad? He says al-jihadu fardu kifaya. It's fardu kifaya. We know that there are certain rulings or ahkam, whether it's fard or haram, the 5 rulings. Fard or haram or makruh and mustahab and mubah, the 5 al-ahkam al-khamsa. Within the fard, there is fard kifaya and there is fard ayn. Fard ayn, that means it's fard upon each and every person. Like the Saleh, for example, is fard. And we don't have to say fard ayn because it's an obvious one. So usually the ulama, they would only point out the fard al-kifaya. Fard al-kifaya is kifaya sufficiency. It's fard if it's established by others, then it's not mandatory upon everyone. So it's fardu kifaya. إذا قام به من يكفي سقط عن الباقين. If some would fulfill it, then it is not then fard upon the rest. ويجب على كل مستطيع في الحالات الآتية. And it's mandatory upon everyone that is able in these situations إذا حضر صف القتال. As we said, al-jihad here talks about war. So when people are in state of war or so, if a person is present in صف القتال, he's in the army, he is in the rows, in the ranks of the army, then he's there, then of course it's mandatory for him. It's not permissible to flee. In the battlefield, it's haram to flee in the battlefield. إذا حضر بلده عدو. If an enemy entered his country or his land or his place, then it's mandatory for him to defend himself, to push away the enemy. And the third one, إذا استنفر الإمام. If the ruler استنفر, يا الذين آمنوا ما لكم إذا قيل لكم انفروا في سبيل الله. الاستنفار is they call it in the terminology that is used, is basically when the ruler would draft. Draft is when they call the people to get into the army. So when there's a draft, he called the people to, they have to join, then they don't have a choice. It becomes fard on them to join. What are the conditions for it to be wujub, shurut wujub al-jihad, which is the obligation? Al-Islam, of course, has to be which is all of the rulings of the deen of Allah with the condition of Al-Islam. Al-Aql, someone that is sane. Al-Bulugh, to be in the age of puberty, not a child. It's basically the shurut of when it's subject of the jihad for someone to be in the army, say, or like this. Al-Dhukuriyya, for it's obligatory upon men. Even though the women, they used to share with at the time of the Prophet ﷺ with what they're capable of doing, but as far as the obligation here, the obligation is upon the men. As-salamatu min ad-darar, to be safe or to be secure from diseases, away from any of the deficiencies that prevents the person from physically able to fight, like sickness, blindness. Al-araj is when someone limp, has something, a defect of any sort. So this is, of course, the case, and this is no haraj, no sin upon a person, and it's mentioned clearly in the Quran. ليس على الأعمى حرج ولا, to the end. ووجود النفقة, and for the person to have the means of spending, because it used to be that each person is responsible for his own self when it comes to spending and taking care of himself while being in war and things like this. Unless the ruler, for example, he would spend, or he would make the means, as it's nowadays, for example, in armies and things like this, they don't have to spend upon themselves. But it's part of the jihad, is al-jihad bil-mal, to make jihad with one's wealth. And this is something that is clearly mentioned in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Aqsam al-jihad, what are the different types of al-jihad? Al-jihad is 4 types. Jihad al-nafs, the jihad of oneself, to make jihad. Jihad is the struggle. So part of the deen of Islam, the struggle has to be there. Either striving with oneself, says وهو جهاد النفس على تعلم الدين, to strive with oneself to learn the deen, والعمل به, to act upon it, والدعوة إليه, to call others to it, والصبر على الأذى فيه, and to be patient if harm afflicts the person as a result of that, which is what is mentioned in Surah Al-Asr. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. So the 4 maratib, or the 4 levels of jihad al-nafs, which is to learn the deen, to act upon the deen, to invite others to the deen, and to be patient as a result of that. And with all what jihad al-nafs means, you have to exert yourself. If a person leaves himself without disciplining oneself, without forcing oneself to do what is right, the nafs ammaratun bisu', the nafs would definitely command you to do evil. This is our own being. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. So without jihad al-nafs, without striving with oneself, none of the kinds and the types of jihad will be fulfilled. So that is a must. And as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, al-mujahid man jahada nafsahu fillah. The mujahid is the one that jahada nafsah, one that struggle against his own self, fi sabilillah, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second type is jihad al-shaytan, the struggle against the shaitan. And shaitan, he says, وَهُوَ جِهَادُ عَلَى دَفْعِ مَا يُلْقِي إِلَى الْعَبْدِ مِنَ الشُّبُهَاتِ وَالشَّهَوَاتِ. What is the plots? What are the ways of the shaitan? the two things, الشبهات والشهوات. الشبهات, the doubtful matters. And that is to be opposed with al-jihad of against the shubuhat, against the doubtful matters, is with ilm, with knowledge. And if a person, he waits till the shubha comes, he waits till the doubt comes, which is now the norm of the affairs of many of the Muslims. If they don't learn the deen, they just watching and listening to everything else. So the doubtful matters are keep on coming onto them. So the heart can be full of these things. And this is all from the shayateen, whether they're human shayateen or jinn shayateen. Where is the jihad that is being done in that for oneself to oppose the shaitan? Is with ilm, to push away these things with seeking the proper knowledge. And some of the knowledge becomes mandatory upon a person because he opened his heart to the ignorance, that how can he push away the ignorance without ilm? If he was somewhere else or protected himself from listening to ignorance, maybe this part of knowledge was not mandatory upon him. And that's why there is nothing whatsoever that the evil ones, they spread unless it's already been established in the deen of Islam with matters of ilm, how to oppose it. But the problem is the lack of knowledge, right? So this is with the shubuhat. With the shahawat, the desires, the lustful desires, the sinful desires, which is also the ways of shaitan at all times. So a person has to make that jihad against the shaitan with the taqwa of Allah, the fear of Allah, and opposing the ways and knowing the ways of shaitan. And knowing your enemy makes it much, much easier in defending yourself if a person doesn't know his enemy. إن الشيطان لكم عدو فاتخذوه عدو. Shaitan is your enemy, so take him as an enemy. But if people are relaxed from this method, they don't take him as an enemy, they don't know the plots of shaitan, then how can they protect themselves? The third one, جهاد الكفار والمنافقين, the jihad of the disbelievers and the hypocrites. ويكون بالقلب واللسان والمال واليد, with the heart, with the tongue, with the wealth, with اليد, meaning with one's hand, that means physically, according to the rules of it. Jihad أصحاب الظلم, the jihad against those who are committing justice or bid'ah, innovations in the deen, munkarat, sins. And he says, وَالْأَفْضَلُ أَنْ يَكُونَ بِالْيَدِ إِذَا قَدَرْ. What's best is to be with one's hand, meaning physically, for those who have the authority, for those who have the ability. Someone has the authority, then of course, to stop corruption and evil and bid'ah and things like this. فَإِنْ عَجَزْ, if he doesn't have the ability, if he doesn't have the authority, or the one of authority does not give him that right, then فَبِالْلِسَانِ, with one's speech. And if he's not able to, because he's overpowered still, فَبِالْقَلْبِ, which is the least level of forbidding the evil, with one's heart. And as we talked about that before, what is meant by with the heart, of course, the heart is to be upon opposing it, and you have to take the means to oppose it in your heart so that you don't become at ease with it. And these barriers that has to be done in the heart protects the heart. And also it means that a person stays away physically from associating himself with the people of bid'ah and munkarat and innovations and sins and things of that nature, because he's going to be affected. So to be away from them. And this is how the nahi an al-munkar bil-qalb, or to forbid the evil with one's heart, is not to be present physically when these bid'ah and these munkarat and these innovations are established. Clear the four types? And each one, as you heard, jihadul nafs is with the four maratib, or the four levels: al-ilm, wal-amal, wal-da'wa, wal-sabr. These four things. Jihadul shaitan against the shubuhat and shahawat. The jihadul kuffar wal munafiqeen, with the heart, with the lisan, with the tongue, with the wealth, and with one's hand. Al-yad is the physical one. Jihad ashab al-dhulm wal-bid'ah wal-munkarat, and there is the best if it's with one's hand, if a person has authority. If not, then with the tongue. If not, then with the heart, which is the levels of al-amru bil-ma'ruf wa nahy 'anil munkar. So this is also from the forms of al-jihad. Clear? Then he says, وَمَا لِلشَّهِيدِ مِنْ فَضْلٍ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. The title is, what is for the shaheed, if a person is martyred as a result of that, as far as the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are so many of the fada'il and the virtues that are mentioned in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. He mentioned here some of what's mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and it's all authentic. يغفر له في أول قطرة من دمه. He will be forgiven his sins from the first shed of blood, from the first drop of blood. His sins will be forgiven. ويرى مقعده من الجنة, and he sees his position in Jannah. That is from the first, when the soul is coming out. ويجار من عذاب القبر, and he's protected from the punishment of the grave. Number 3 and number 4. ويأمن من الفزع الأكبر, and he is secure, safe from the greatest horror, which is in the Day of Judgment, terrifying nature of the Day of Judgment. He's safe from that. Number 5, ويحلى حلية الإيمان, and he will be adorned with the adornment of al-Iman, something also physical that will be upon them. ويزوج من الحور العين, and he will be given the wives of الحور العين. ويشفع في 70 من أقاربه, and he will intercede for 70 of his relatives, intercede for them in the day of Al-Qiyamah. All of that is to honor. It's this honor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the martyr, to the shaheed. All of that is not usually the subject in the fiqh perspective usually, because again it's related to specifically the laws of things. So that's why the next one, adab al-harb, what's the etiquettes or the manners of warfare. من adab al-harb في الإسلام, some of it, again not all of it, because there's very specific details. He says عدم الغدر, عدم الغدر, forbidding al-ghadr. Al-ghadr is betrayal, breaking the covenant. So if the Muslimin, they have a treaty with the disbelievers, with their enemies, those who want to kill them and fight against them, it is not permissible to break the treaty. You have to fulfill the treaty. Al-ghadr is when you give your covenant, when you give your promises, and you break it to cause harm to them. This is the Prophet ﷺ never done that, and he said, "Al-anbiya la yaghdirun," anbiya, they would never do something like this. And this is such an evil thing, especially for those, and the ghadr, especially with all of the different, it's a very detailed subject, really. But for people to see, even in the history of mankind, if you want to, as the ulama they say, if you want to see if the person is upon al-haq, the truth or falsehood, see when he has power. Look at him when he has physical power. How does he act? Because when people are weak and oppressed, they don't want to harm themselves. So they hide things, they act nicely, everything is fine. But give them power, how they're going to act. Right? Power meaning they're well established, they have authority. And that's why when you see, for example, people when they're in the war, this is in the context of war, when they win the war, what happens when the Muslims win the war versus when the disbelievers win the war? When the Prophet ﷺ entered Mecca, he entered in with his head bowed down, is in state of sujood, to humble himself and forgiving and pardoning people and things of that nature. So al-ghadr, especially for those who have authority, because if someone is weak, he does not even have the ability to do anything. But when someone is well established and is able to revenge from his enemy, he's able to do all kinds of things, he can either betray, and that's what normally happens. They would betray every covenant. وَكُلَّمَا عَاهَدُوا عَهْدًا نَبَذَهُ فَرِيقٌ مِّنْهُمْ. This is their nature. But when it comes to the believers, this is how it's forbidden. Even the Prophet ﷺ would teach that to to the children. And there's so many evidences this, but we don't want to be brief here. But this is a subject that we need to talk about separately, because we need to be, as Muslims, away from al-ghadr. Al-ghadr is to betray someone. And that's why some of the definition of it is عندما يبذل الإنسان من نفسه, when you give from your own self your promises, your covenants that you will the other side will be protected, don't worry, everything is good, and then after that he breaks this. How evil that is. عمران ibn Husayn النعمان ibn Bashir رضي الله عنه, as it's a sound hadith, he was young, a child, and he was supposed to, or his mother gave him dates. In some of the narration that it was the other way around, but his mother gave him dates to give to the Prophet ﷺ. And how much can a child carry of dates? Not much. Some of the nation it was the other way around, but he ate it on the way, which is also a normal thing. So when the Prophet ﷺ, when he came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he told him, he says, "Ghudar," that means you betrayed. So he would call him this as a way of, giving him a lesson that don't do this, don't betray. But anyway, so it's something that is needs for it to be discussed, and it's even a hadith of Herakl, the long hadith of Herakl, when Herakl, the king of the Romans, when he asked Abu Sufyan, and he was a disbeliever, radiallahu anhu, and then after that he became a Muslim. But he asked him one of the questions, وَهَلْ يَغْدِرْ? Does the Prophet ﷺ betray? Same word. He says no. But we are in a state of hudna or peace treaty. We don't know what he's going to do. This is the only thing that he could have passed, because he said, I could not lie, because if I lie, I don't want to be witnessed or something against me that I lied. So everything was against him. All the answers to the questions was against the kuffar of Quraysh, showing the virtue of the Prophet ﷺ. He's commending them to be truthful, this and that. The only thing that he said it might be, for their side, is that he said, we're now at time of no wars between them, so we're not sure what he's going to do. That's the only thing that he could have said. But he says no, he does not do any form of betrayal whatsoever. So he عدم الغدر, and that's how it's mentioned first. عدم قتل النساء والأطفال إذا لم يقاتلوا, not killing the women and children as long as they're not in combat and fighting, because war again is between two armies. This is how the concept of al-jihad at all times in the books of fiqh. Two armies that are carrying arms and then fighting with each other. And one of the very basic things also when it comes to the wars in Islam, there's no such a thing as killing indiscriminately anybody like this. And they used to have the Prophet ﷺ, what they call it in Manjaniq, the thing that the fireballs that what is it? Cannibal. Yes, am I saying it right? How do you? Say it again. Cannibal. Yes, the one that throws. This can kill masses of people, and used to be present at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, he never done it, except that he prepared it to scare the other side, but not to use it. So the issue of, and that's why it's only within the ranks of war. عدم قتل النساء والأطفال. البعد عن العجب والغرور, to stay away from liking oneself or arrogance or attributing things to oneself, because this is always the case when someone defeat their enemies. عدم تمني لقاء العدو, not to wish to meet the enemy, as the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تتمنوا لقاء العدو, do not wish to meet your enemies, ولكن إذا لقيتموهم فاصبروا, but if you meet them, then be patient. And that's why there is detailed rulings in the matters of fighting and so on, when it comes to the difference between the rulings of initiating versus the rules of a reality that is being present. So this is here الدعاء بالنصر والتأييد من Allah, to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with aid. And from this dua, اللهم منزل الكتاب ومجري السحاب وهازم الأحزاب اهزمهم وانصرنا عليه. Oh Allah, the one that reveals the book and the one that makes the sahab, the clouds, to move, and the one that defeats the parties and the confederates and the like of them, defeat them and make them victorious against them. So the subject of al-adab, or the etiquettes to be observed, this is just some of the brief things that are mentioned here, and with so much examples and details from the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The second point, يحرم الفرار. الفرار من الزحف, to flee from the battlefield. This is a major sin. If someone is in the battlefield, and this is actually in every army in the world, if someone does this, this is betraying and things of that nature. So except in two cases, التحرف للقتال, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that in the Quran, إلا متحرفا إلا متحيز لقتال أو متحرفا لقتال أو متحيزا إلى فئة. Either التحرف, that means to الفرار is to flee, to give one's back to the enemies and run away, unless it's part of the tactics that he returns back from the other side or something like this. This is التحرف للقتال, to move away for another way of fighting. And the second one is التحيز إلى فئة, to not flee but to move away, to go to one's army or to one's part of the army so that they can go back again and fight. But to flee like that and to run away, this is a major sin if a person is there. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he said that whoever says this dua 3 times, and this is in Sunan Abi Dawud and it's sound, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives one's sin even if he had tawalla al-zahf, even if he left or fled away from the battlefield, which is astaghfirullah alladhi la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum wa atubu ilayh. Whoever says that 3 times, this is means of seeking forgiveness. Astaghfirullah alladhi la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum wa atubu ilayh. أسرى الحرب, the captives of the war. He says النساء والأطفال, the women and children, يسترقون, which meaning becomes in the الرق is the slavery and the like of that. If it's approved by the ruler, if they are victorious. الرجال المقاتلون, the men that are fighting, the imam has the choice whether to set them free or to exchange them or to kill them, according to what is the benefit versus what's harmful. Then it says يجب على الإمام أن يتفقد جيشه عند المسير. It's upon the imam that he or the ruler to make sure that his army is well, and of course he's responsible. ويمنع المخذل والمرجف, and he removes away the one that put them down or make them fear their enemies or things of that nature. ولا يستعين بكافر إلا لضرورة, and he does not seek help from a kafir except if it's a necessity. ويعد الزاد, and prepare which is basically like the logistics of armies and things like this, provisions. ويسير بالجيش برفق, and he walks with them, he takes them with gentleness, and he seeks for them the best places, and he protects them and prevents them from corruption and sins, and he speaks to them with things that makes them have a strong moral, if it's correct to say, يقوي نفوسهم ويرغبهم في الشهادة, and give them the الرغبة and the zeal for martyrdom, and he commands them to be patient. ويقسم الجيش, all the different responsibilities, to split them to this, you here, you there, different positions. ويعين عليهم العرفاء, and he appoints the different commands and the guards, and he sends the العيون, the eyes, the spies to the enemy, and he would choose from whoever he wants from them to do the special tasks, or the special special what do you call it, the word, that's also the word, missions, yeah, special missions. Because there's, when it comes to the booty of the war, it's given according to the rank of the person, especially with those who have special missions, they get something extra more than others because of the danger that they face. And he makes mashura, consultation, with the people of knowledge and the people of opinions and things like this. The last thing is, so this is with regards to the responsibility upon the ruler or upon the commander, which is also something that is detailed. The last one, ما يجب على الجيش للإمام, what's obligatory upon the army towards their leader, of course, is to obey him. يلزم الجيش طاعة الإمام, they have to obey him. والصبر معه, to be patient with him. And ولا يجوز الغزو إلا بإذنه, it is not permissible to fight except by his permission. So الجهاد في سبيل الله, the ghazw or fighting, it's not an individual decision. It's by the people of authority. This is their job. Like war, people don't, a person on his own, he doesn't go for war. Right? It's well established, organized, as it's known to the human beings. Unless the enemy attack them with a surprise. Surprise, that means they're taken without preparing themselves. يخافون شره وأذاه, they fear, so that each one would protect himself. وإن طلب العدو الهدنة, and if the enemy ask for a ceasefire or something like this, and they أو كانوا في الأشهر الحرم فالمسلمين عقدوا, or they were in the sacred months, which is the the 4 months, Muharram, and Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, and Muharram, and Rajab. The norm is there's no fighting in them unless it's inevitable, something they cannot push away. Or if they ask the enemies, they ask for, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَإِن جَنَحُوا لِلسَّلْمِ فَاجْنَحْ لَهُ وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. If they ask for peace, then do peace and rely upon Allah. All of that is according to what's benefiting to them. So this is briefly what is mentioned in this short chapter. And then after that, we start with al-mu'amalat. Mu'amalat is the transactions. Buying and selling is the first one. But we'll start that, inshallah ta'ala, fresh, inshallah, next time. And this is where there are many different rulings that needs to be understood and many terminologies. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit, inshallah. The hadith, we didn't take hadith 122, is that correct? According to what it's not in the list that I have that we took it before. 122. No, even though we took 120. Okay, so 122, inshallah. 122. This is the hadith from 118, I believe. This is from the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi and the 10 of Ibn Rajab. So that's starting from 118. So that's why we go back and forth all over the place. So we try to take one hadith from Kitab al-Tawheed, and then a hadith from Bulugh al-Maram and Fiqh, and then hadith from the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi. And there's still also the hadith of the last chapter of Sahih al-Bukhari, which is titled Tawheed also. It mainly talks about the names and attributes of Allah. So 122, it's one of the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi. Major hadith, one of the principles of the deen, one of the foundations of the deen, is established from this hadith and the like of it. So let's read it first, inshallah. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد. من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد. رواه البخاري ومسلم. وفي رواية لمسلم من عمل عملا ليس عليه أمرنا فهو رد. من عمل عملا ليس عليه أمرنا فهو رد. We need to have both, inshallah, because one explains also the hadith more. And since this hadith is one of the hadith that basically is counted as one of the usul of al-Islam. As Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he says, هذا الحديث معدود من أصول الإسلام. It's one of the counted hadith that goes back to the principles of al-Islam. And even he said, you can say that half of the adillah, half of the evidence of the shara comes from this. Why? Because this is basically the hadith that is always mentioned about the bid'ah, about innovations in the deen. So this is one of the important hadith that definitely needs to be memorized. And I would quote some of the things here before, since it's an important hadith. All hadith are important. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, he said, إنه قاعدة عظيمة من قواعد الإسلام. One of the great principles of the deen of Islam. وإنه من جوامع كلمه صلى الله عليه وسلم, from the comprehensiveness of speech of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. فإنه صريح, very explicit, في رد البدع, to oppose the bid'ah, innovations in the deen, والمخترعات, the invented things in the deen. وهو مما يعتنى بحفظه, which is something that people need to memorize it and to always have it present. واستعماله في إبطال المنكرات, and always use it to refute the munkarat, the evil actions and things like this. And many of the ulama, they mentioned this, and it's basically as you hear, من أحدث في أمرنا هذا, من أحدث. Ahdath means al-hadath is an incident, right? So ahdath comes in the meaning of something introduced that wasn't present before. So man ahdatha, that means he introduced something that was not present before. Fi amrina, in our matters of others, in this matter of our others, in this matter of ours, which is basically the deen of Islam. So ever introduce something in the deen of Islam, ma laysa minhu. That means it's not part of it. It's not part of it. فهو رد يعني it's rejected. It goes back against him. That means it does not become part of the deen of Islam. It's not part of the deen of Islam. He invented something. So it's rejected is to rebound back on him. It's his religion. It's his way. It's not the way of the deen of Islam. And this is very clear. But you see how the second narration, how it's important for those who they take this, they already, one of the very important principles to know from the people of bid'ah, when people innovate in the deen, they want to justify evil and innovations in the deen. So what do? They already decided that they want to introduce something. So then they go to these evidences and they twist the meaning of it. So they say it doesn't mean that if we introduce something that means it's all bad, because it says ما ليس منه, it's not part of it. So if someone invented, of course there's bid'ah in aqidah and there's bid'ah in matters of ibadat. So bid'ah in aqidah, inventing a matter of belief to the people that wasn't at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or the Sahaba radiallahu anhum never understood something like this. So this is how, for example, when ilm al-kalam and philosophy got introduced to some of the Muslims, so they start introducing this to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and matters of aqidah and also matters of ibadah. They say we're making dhikr. So ma laysa minhu, that means it's not part of it, but there is dhikr mentioned in the deen of Islam that we need to make dhikr. How to make dhikr? We then see what works best for us. So twisting the meaning of the hadith, even though the matter is very man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu. How the Sahaba radiallahu anhum understood it, it's a detailed subject. But the second narration, man amila amalan, whoever do an action, laysa alayhi amruna, is not upon our affair, upon our way, فهو رد, that means it's rejected from the person. So this is an important principle, and the importance of refuting and to be against al-bid'ah. And one of the signs of the ways of the people of Ahl Sunnah, that they talk about bid'ah, which is an irritating subject to many people. And Saleh, for example, they used to warn against al-qassasin. Al-qassas is the one that is basically says qasas, which is storytelling, even though we are commanded in the Quran, and the Prophet ﷺ was told, فَقُصُصِ الْقَصَصَ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, narrate the stories, and the Quran has stories, أحسن القصص, and there is qasas, stories in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But what they meant by al-qassasin at the time of the early generations of Islam, those who, it's not about them saying stories, but that's all they say. They don't say this is halal, this is haram, the things that people don't like to hear. So they become popular among the people because they talk about the things that make the people like, and the stories and the stories. And then they don't care about what's authentic, what's not authentic. They don't warn people against kufr and shirk and bid'ah and things like this. So the deen has to be with all of these things together. So this is to show that there is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and what negates this is the bid'ah, but we'll talk about it inshallah ta'ala in more details, and the principles of it and the different categories of it later inshallah, since the purpose of that is just to be as brief as we can inshallah. So we'll stop here inshallah. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam.